Earthquake was over with. Someone said, and we never start or. For me. I've got a bunch of recipes. There's one. My dad made a recipe book for me. Oh, God, excuse me. I got recipes from cafes in Springfield.
All right, would all rise? We've already performed our roll call before the closed session, so we'll begin with please bow your head. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight to handle the city's business. We ask your guidance, and we also ask that you continue to keep blessing West Plains, making it the best place to live. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome back.
Thank you. First off, we have the consent agenda.
Make a motion, we approve the items as presented on the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Right.
Next, recognition of guests. We have Kathleen Morrissey. You're
Just
up,
like that, boom.
and you'll have 5 minutes. I'll wave at you when there's a minute left.
I'm just here to thank you all for all the support and help city gave us, and we in turn hope we're returning this through some level of economic vitality that festival brings to West Plains and surrounding areas. We tried something really new this year. We've never had a footprint either this large or including the downtown area. We have been up to around the square years past. In fact, when we first started the festival, that's where we were. We started around the square, and then we kind of evolved down Main Street to the Civic Center, and then it became the Civic Center thing. But this year, because we had extra funding from the Humanities Council and the state of Missouri marketing tourism, we said this might be the year to revisit some growth possibilities for this. And mind you, these were small minds that were coming up with some of the ideas, but I just really love it when something really small, there's just a small little bit of something that just takes root, and then it has to grow and has to be nurtured. And this is what you all do, is we bring you something that might be something you might like. It might be something that is distasteful to half of you, but not maybe the other half not. Anyway, we always come here and we always ask you to support the kind of things that we have begun in this town and have seen through for this festival about 30 years. And I'm the only one now left that was there for the first one. So that, if that tells you anything, this year, because of technology, because of the extra marketing money, a lot of really very interesting things happen. We'll be presenting a final report to the Missouri Humanities Council right around the middle of July. We have our last cohort meeting with the 9 other festivals that got this kind of funding on the 7th of July. I'll get to hear everything, all the things that happened to the people who were in the same cohort with us. And that time, I will submit that to you, the final report that we submit to Humanities Council. They gave us $10,000 in grant money that we could spend any way that we wanted to in order to bring more humanities to more people. And I think I described that the last time I was here. Anyway, and then they gave us the $10,000 in-kind marketing money from the state of Missouri Division of Tourism. we think that we used it in very interesting, unusual and unique ways. Humanities Council does as well. We know that that it did have the numbers effect that they were looking for. This is a brand new concept for us, which is different than a lot of the other, what would the other 9 festivals were doing. They also had big changes going on for them in their attendees, attendance and the things that they were able to program. But I mean, like West Plains does, we were the biggest, when I say the biggest increment of change happened here. So I'm not going to tell you about the good and the bad. You probably have heard half goods and half bads, and we're always going to have that us to a certain degree. But what I want to thank you for is for always being there, because through the years we have gone through these kinds of growth spurts and then down spurts, and for whatever reasons, you guys were always there. That's all I have to say. And I'll be with you when the reports come out. Google Analytics has told us some very interesting things. Any questions from you?
I know, with the footprint we had this time. If we grow into that, oh my gosh, that's gonna be awesome. You know, if we grow into that footprint, that's gonna be, so keep it up.
Mhm. I've been in just informal conversations with members of your staff who we also have had lifelong relationships with. And, you know, when I get down with these things and I'm thinking, gee, maybe we could have done something differently. You know what? The thing is that the input is, let's go bigger.
Yeah.
So, you know, nothing pumps me up more than people who are not afraid to tackle the problems, the challenges, whatever those challenges are. We can make them good.
I know picking people up, you know, I picked up people from Oklahoma that came in. for this,
Oklahoma, there.
and Colorado
Mhm.
and Nebraska, you know, just to come to the festival. So
Yeah.
I had to do selfies with them when they found out, you know.
Google Analytics is telling us a lot about that. And the 4 top cities, when you look at a location festival, you would expect it on the 4th, what you would expect at the top number is going to be from your own location. But it wasn't. We had 3 that were bigger than us, and we were 4th. Number 1 was St. Louis, number 2 was Springfield, and 3 was Denver, and 4th was us. So, you know, anyway, then it goes Chicago and, you know, on down the line, but I can show you the top 20.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you. Oh,
Do you know when, or maybe it's a question for Erling, when we would see what kind of revenue was generated through taxes that particular weekend? Would not break that out?
it's not by day.
Oh, it is by month?
Yeah, in the past, we could see the trends. So even though it doesn't tell us an exact weekend, we can look at trends for the month of June and just see how trending this year is different from last year. So we make those kind of comparisons, but the numbers were that we had record numbers for everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So including, you know, the headliner concert that you also funded through the Department of your Economic Vitality grant program. Yeah, this and got a lot of really thumbs up on that. So yeah, everything was record numbers except for the mule jump. And then there was one other thing, and I can't remember what that was, but everything else that we could measure and that we could compare to something else, you know, and the people in the Yellow House and the storytelling people, you're really going to have to battle to get your name on that list because they're already wanting to be the next storytellers.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is the state of the city address.
To begin with, I wish to thank Sam and Erlene and Emily and everyone else who have assisted in gathering this information. The West Plains City Charter, section 4.4.b states, the mayor during the first quarter of the city's fiscal year shall present to the council information as to the affairs of the city and any recommendations of the mayor. And I have missed this mark since becoming mayor, but I want to thank Johnny for keeping me on point. Good communications is the key to a lasting relationship. So I will be continuing updates through the year with, through our podcast. And this will become an annual presentation, moving forward. For some financial highlights, at the top of the list for 2022, voters approved the extension of the capital improvement sales tax without a sunset clause, meaning we can now plan long-term projects and future equipment needs, knowing that revenues will be there to cover the cost. I'd like to thank the voters for renewing this important tax. Revenues from this tax supports our civic center, library, and new city equipment that our employees use to provide services. In 2022, the general sales tax revenues were up by $229,000. Our use tax revenues were up $86,000. From 2021, the capital sales tax were up $74,000. And transportation sales tax were up $63,000 compared to 2021. The city's general fund budget ended the year, the 2022 year, $1.4 million higher than we had budgeted. In addition to higher revenues, expenses came in $900,000 lower due to some projects that weren't completed within the year and because of other cost savings. But I'd like to thank the city council and the city staff for being good stewards of our tax dollars. There were several projects going on that the city's citizens have asked me about. The plans for the Independence overpass projects are currently being reviewed by MoDOT and by BNSF, and we hope to break ground on the construction before the end of the year. Right-of-way has been secured for the North Fork Detention Basin, and the bid opening scheduled for this week, and progress on the other detention basins is ongoing, and we hope to be finished with the construction by next spring. Beginning June 23rd and through July 7th, citizens will have a chance to comment on the draft comprehensive plan that will outline the city goals over the next 10 to 20 years. We have seen good participation from the community so far, and I hope that everyone will take the chance to continue to provide feedback as we near the end of the process. These projects don't happen without the day-to-day work of our city employees. So I'd like to thank everyone who has had a hand in moving these projects along. Major infrastructure improvements in our water and wastewater treatment and distribution systems are on the horizon. Projects that we will need to complete in the upcoming years include boosting capacity of our water towers, improvements to our wastewater treatment, and replacing lead and copper lines in the system. We will be looking at a number of options available to pay for these improvements, including grants, loans, and possibly issuing debt to help minimize the financial impact on the residents. I'd like to close by saying that 2022 and the first part of 2023 has been productive for the city. And we've been able to make progress on a lot of projects that will benefit the community in the future. It takes dedicated people to make these things happen, including a city council that commits to working together for the benefits of our residents, and a hardworking staff who cares about our city. As mayor, I've heard the challenges from other cities face, and it makes me proud to know that whatever challenges come our way, we have the right team in place to address them. I'm proud to serve as mayor, and I'm looking forward to a bright future for West Plains. Thank you.
Good job.
Well, with that, May God bless, and we are adjourned. We'll be going into our work session now. Hi, ladies. This is 2 months in a row that you've been here. I'm glad to see you've taken interest. Yeah, thank you. We try to run through this stuff, but welcome. Erlene.
Funny lady.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's so nice to be here tonight. I want to present to you guys, or welcome, if you will, Joy Howard. She is going to be speaking to us about some debt options for our upcoming projects. As the mayor just mentioned, we've got a few of them for utilities. We've also got some things on the city side that you may want to consider debt funding for in the future. I just met Joy tonight for the first time in person. She said that she thought I was going to be a bit taller. So unfortunately, that's just not going to happen, but fortunately, the mic has already been adjusted. Thank you, Kathleen, for doing that earlier.
We're gonna have Shane come talk first.
Right, exactly. Shane in between, just really go all over. So if you don't have anything else for me, Joy?
Joy, have you been here before?
Hi, everyone. Am I good here?
Yep.
Okay, so a few of you know me. The last time I worked on a financing for the city was back in 2022, but I didn't physically come here. That was during COVID, so I was zoomed in. But hopefully some of you remember me. But I've actually worked as the city's financial advisor on various financings since 2006, which is a long time. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Anyway, so I'm really happy to be here tonight. And I'm going to basically present to you various information about types of financing and who's involved. And I'm ready to start. I think you're going to put up a PowerPoint, aren't you? Okay. I have this recurring nightmare about technology that I'm doing a presentation and my time's over when it finally gets started. Oh, okay.
So.
It's coming up or should I go ahead? Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
okay, sounds good. So basically, anytime you're doing a financing or thinking about doing financings, you should start with a capital plan that covers more than just the current financing that you're going to do. And ideally, a capital plan covers a 3 to 5 year period. And it shows the different things that you're going to finance, what the cost is, and the type of financing to be utilized. So I guess I'll say next page. I don't normally do that. This page shows basically the types of borrowing that are available in Missouri, and every state has a different set of specialized kinds of financings. I didn't list every single one that you could do. There's community improvement districts and there's tax increment financing that the city's done. But as far as regular governmental financing, these are the types of financing you would use. The first one is general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds require voter approval. They're backed by the city's full faith and credit. Once you have voter approval, it gives you the authority to pass a tax rate at whatever level it takes to pay off that debt. And I think I said it requires voter approval, and the voter approval in Missouri is different on different election dates. Some of the dates require 2/3 and some of the dates require 4/7. And I think that's pretty unique to Missouri. Most states only require a simple majority. Revenue bonds are used basically for utility financing. The source of payment for the revenue bonds is the utility revenue, like electric funds, water funds, sewer funds. And they also require voter approval, but only a simple majority at any election date. Lease financing is also known as annual appropriation financing. And most of the financings I've been involved in with the city have been based on lease financing. One of the nice things about lease financing is that they don't require voter approval. one of the bad things about lease financing is there's no revenue stream attached to it. There's no authority to increase your revenues. But the city has from time to time implemented sales taxes and specifically to do lease financing. So you go to the voters, you get the sales tax approved, simple majority, and then you can do a lease financing and use those sales taxes or whatever other source of revenues to pay for them. Basically, any governmental debt, unless it's used for private purposes, is intended to be tax exempt. So that's the beauty of governmental financing, is ideally you're getting a special rate that's tax exempt compared to other US Treasury obligations. Next page. I have to remember to say
Oh,
it.
you don't, we'll figure it out.
So these show investment grade ratings from Moody's and S&P. These are the two main rating companies as far as municipal debt. You may have also heard of Fitch, and some other companies, but they really don't do that much. And here I've distinguished how the ratings are assigned. So Moody's ratings always have like A, and then if there something can be after it, like AA or A, just a plain A, or BAA. And then S&P, which is the city's rating agency, they go by all capital letters. And then they designate within categories. Moody's designates within categories by a 1, 2, or 3. So if you have an A rating, but you're the best A rating, you would be an A1. Standard & Poor's uses pluses and minus. So if you are the highest A rating from Standard & Poor's, it would be an A+. If you're the worst, it would be an A-. West Plains certificates of participation are currently rated A by S&P. And if you were to issue general obligation bonds, instead of being an A rated, it would be an A+. The general obligation bonds usually get a slightly higher rating than lease obligations. Next page is what the rating agencies look at when they consider rating revenue bonds. I went into a little bit of detail here because I know in your capital planning, you're looking at quite a few utility types of issues. But if it was a water system or electric system, the first thing they look at is the system characteristics, which is asset condition, the service area, and the system size. There's a real negative bias towards small utilities. Financial strength, they look at what's called debt coverage. So debt coverage refers to how much revenue you have dollar for dollar to pay for debt service. So acceptable coverage would be like $1.25 for every $1 of debt you're paying. I will talk more about that later, but if you were going through the state revolving fund, they also have debt coverage requirements. This, by the way, refers to rating agency and publicly sold debt. SRF is a little bit different, but they do require debt coverage. They require $1.10 for every $1 of debt. Standard & Poor's looks at how much cash you have on hand, certain other debt ratios. They look at the management of the system. They like to know that you're looking at your rates basically every year. They want you to have regulatory compliance, capital planning. And then last of all, getting into rate covenants and reserves again is the legal provision. You may voluntarily have, for example, $1.50 for every $1 of debt service. Standard & Poor's wants you to also have that embedded within your documents so that it says like you have to have $1.25 for each $1 you pay. But then if you're voluntarily having higher revenues, that's of course a rating positive. Next page. If your rating isn't above an A rating, then sometimes it's feasible to get bond insurance. There's only, there used to be a whole lot of bond insurers. Now there's only 2 that have good ratings, and their ratings are AA. And I'm not going to get into the nuances of that, but if you don't have a really great rating, you can purchase bond insurance. And that would, of course, the purpose would be to get you a better rating and consequently lower interest rates. The next page is the features of revenue bonds. As I said, voter approval is required. Revenues are pledged. You have to have a coverage requirement. You have to have what's called a parity test. That means that if you did a revenue bond issue now for like, let's say you went out and you got 20 million of revenue bond issues passed with the idea that you would issue them over a period of years. There's going to be a covenant for what's called a parity test. And if you issue like 2 million now, and then in 3 years from now, you try and pick up another piece of that voter approved debt, you would have to demonstrate that you had maintained your user charges at a certain level. And that's the parity test. There's also usually a depreciation fund, which is basically used for repairs and replacement to the system. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the state revolving fund. State revolving fund doesn't require a rating. There's a 20-year maximum maturity for publicly sold revenue bonds. They can basically be virtually any maturity, could even be up to 40 years, but most governments have 30 years or shorter. But a lot of governments don't like going through the state revolving fund because of that 20-year maximum term. The covenants are different, which I said, like publicly sold debt is usually $1.25 for each dollar. The state is $1.10 for each dollar. But they do need voter approval, even if you're going through the state revolving fund. And for your financings, if you, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what time frame you're thinking about, but you'd have to look at, if you need to get some financings done, you want them to go to the state revolving fund, you've got to catch an election date, then it's got to get state revolving fund approval, and it can become a very drawn out process. So if you are thinking about revenue bonds through the state revolving fund, you want to get your issues on the ballot as soon as possible. Next page is a little bit more about lease obligations. There's no revenue pledge at all. It's an annual appropriation. All that you can tell the purchasers of the debt is that you promise to include the debt service in your budget and to consider the appropriation, but there's no legal binding pledge of revenues. If you have revenue bonds outstanding, then the lease obligations become subordinate to the revenue bonds. That means you pay the revenue bonds first, and what's left over pays the lease obligations. The ability to sell lease obligations is based on ability and willingness to pay. So ability to pay is that you have a source of revenues that's going to be sufficient to pay the lease. Willingness means that you have to put up some type of collateral. So if you were, for example, doing a water tower financing, you would put the water tower up as collateral, just kind of like financing your home, where your home is the collateral for your loan that you get from the bank. Oh, which I said on the last line. Okay. What is the best method of financing? Lowest cost isn't always the best approach. So as I said, so with SRF financing, there's a 20-year maximum, and with publicly sold obligations, there is no 20-year cap. So some of my clients opt out of doing SRF, even though it would be the least expensive method of financing. Sometimes my clients pick lease financing because they don't want to go to the voters for approval, either because they don't think they'll get approval or simply because of the timing required to go to the voters. So that's kind of my role, is to help you, guide you through what options you have for each type of financing. Well, each project you're financing, I'll help you determine what type of financing might be the best. So I'm what is legally known as a municipal advisor. The main thing about my role is I have a legal fiduciary duty to my clients. So you can rest assured that if I recommend a particular type of debt, I'm recommending to you what I absolutely is think is in your best interest. You are not obligated to take my recommendations. You can throw anything out that I recommend. And under the law, I'm regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. If I give you advice and a recommendation and you don't accept it, the good news is that I can still work for you. The Securities and Exchange Commission does not require that I terminate if you don't take my advice. Broker dealers, that would be like Commerce Bank is a broker dealer. I don't know what names you'll know, Raymond James, who's around these days, Stifel Nicholas, if you've heard of them, but the broker dealers that underwrite bonds, underwriting meaning they buy securities from you and then they sell them to the public. Some of those firms also have municipal advisors like me, but they're less independent than me because they switch back and forth from being a financial advisor to being an underwriter. Legally, they can't do it for a single transaction. So if you passed a revenue bond issue and hired someone as your underwriter, they can't go halfway through the transaction. I'm sorry, I switched it the other way. If you hire them as your financial advisor, you get halfway through the transaction. They can't switch to being an underwriter. But if you were doing two transactions at once, they can be financial advisor on one, underwriter on another, and they can give you kind of any advice then they want. Their fiduciary duty is not real pure as it is with me. I'm totally independent. I don't work with any broker dealers. So I pretty much covered that at the bottom, which is my difference is that I'm completely independent. The services I provide as a municipal advisor include issue size and structure, the method of sale. There's two methods of sale I'll talk about more later. I can prepare the offering document that's document that describes your credit, the issue, and it's used to market the bonds. I help you get the rating, I help you market, and I help you with pricing. The next page is the other parties to a transaction, and this is a public sale. This isn't SRF financing. You would want to have a financial advisor like myself or a municipal advisor. You would also need to have an underwriter because I don't sell the securities. I don't buy and sell securities. I help you find the underwriter who will give you the best rates and prices. And then that's the underwriter's role, is to buy and sell the securities. You have a bond counsel, which in the case of a lease financing, your bond counsel is referred to as special tax counsel. The city has typically used Tony Stegeman from Gilmore and Bell, and she's out of Kansas City. But of course, you know, if you're not happy, you can always change the rules of these the party that you select for these roles. You have a paying agent or a trustee in the case of lease financing. That would be a bank. And there's very few banks that offer this service. As an example, though, UMB Bank, US Bank, but there's very few Missouri banks that are in this rule. But basically, if you issue bonds, or leases, the lease obligations are typically in $5,000 denominations. So if you have even a $1 million issue, that means there's 200 certificates or 200 bonds. So the city doesn't want to sit there and write checks to 200 buyers of bonds. So you have a paying agent or a trustee who keeps track of who the owners are, and they make the payments. They'll invoice you, you pay the paying agent pays the holders of the securities. You may have what's called a disclosure counsel, which is usually your bond counsel. If you do a complicated financing where there's, for example, a tax increment financing where there's a whole lot more description than just information about the city, I am not necessarily the appropriate party for preparing the official statement or the offering document. And in that case, you might want to hire bond counsel as disclosure counsel, and they prepare that document. The next page I've kind of already talked about, which is the role of the underwriter, is buying and selling securities. And then the next page is a little bit more about what an underwriter can do. Because of the way the Securities and Exchange Commission regulated municipal advisors and underwriters, they were very concerned about the fiduciary duty aspect. So they didn't want underwriters to do certain things. In order for an underwriter to give you advice, if you don't have a municipal advisor like me, then basically they can only give advice if you hire them for a specific transaction. And this slide that I wrote is not entirely clear, but number 3 is important, which is that they cannot help you prepare a request for proposal either. So if you have an underwriter, as far as those other parties, the paying agent, bond counselor, they're not, underwriters are not allowed to prepare the request for proposal for those services. Next page. An underwriter, because they don't have a fiduciary duty to you, have to disclose the following. They have to actually give you a document that says their primary role is as an underwriter. They have an arm's length commercial transaction with you, and their interests are different, can be different than yours. I summarized it. You can read the whole thing later. And underwriters, under any circumstances, unlike a municipal advisor, cannot under any circumstance give you the following 12 services. I'm hoping you're on the same page as me. Is that okay? So some of these just never come up. I don't think you'll ever be doing like derivatives number 2, so it's probably not important. But the things that an underwriter can't do that I can do that are important is advising on the method of sale, determination to issue. In other words, are you thinking about doing something pay as you go versus borrowing? An underwriter can't tell you, oh, do a bond issue, because they have a conflict of interest. Underwriter can advise you on competitive sales, financial feasibility, budget planning, or 10 overall rating strategies, or the terms of a request for proposal. And the overall rating strategies, that's important because if you have more than one lease outstanding, for example, and you're incurring another lease, you don't want an underwriter who's only allowed to give you advice on one specific transaction. You want to have someone who can give you advice on everything. I'm telling you this because I'm going to back up a little bit to make this a little bit more clear. Before 2006, when the city did financings, the city did either go just to a bank or just to an underwriter. You didn't take RFPs. Somewhere along the way, your banks were getting really angry because they didn't have an opportunity to bid on your bonds. So that, and they also were telling you you're not necessarily getting the best financing terms. So that's how I got discovered in the city. You all went out and decided you really needed a municipal advisor. Anyway, an underwriter, I'm on underwriter sale of bonds, and I get paid by a fee and that's set ahead of time. And I don't base it on how many bonds you issue or how many lease obligations. It is affected by size, but if you were doing like a 20 million issue, I might charge 20 or 30,000, but I don't do it based on a percentage. So if we start a financing and it starts at 10 million and then it goes to 20 million, my fee's not going to change because it's not based on a percent. It's based on complexity. Underwriters, their fee is based on a percent and it's largely affected by the size of the issue. They only make money though if the transaction, the lease or the bonds are sold. So if they have a 1% fee, that 1% fee is derived from the sale of the securities. And they only get that money if they're able to sell. So their goal is to set interest rates high enough to get buyers really interested. So their goal is completely the opposite of a municipal advisor. Their goal is to represent investors and make it easy to sell to the investors. My goal is to get you the lowest interest rate. Bond counsel. So bond counsel is a law firm. And as I said, they're bond counsel if they're working on bonds, they're special tax counsel if they're working on a lease, but it's the same firm. The bond counsel prepares the documents. They review the legality of the issue under federal and state law. And they render opinions on whether the bonds or lease obligations are tax exempt. And again, unless they're for a private purpose, most municipal bonds are exempt in Missouri from both federal and state income taxes, which is their appeal to investors. The paying agent on the next page, I kind of already explained this role to you. They accept payments from you and then turn around and pay each of the holders of the securities. The next page has to do with disclosure. The Securities and Exchange Commission isn't able to regulate. How am I doing on time? I forgot to look when I started. So if I'm going too long, let me know. Anyway, the Securities and Exchange Commission, under something that's called the Tower Amendment, is not allowed to regulate the sale of municipal securities. So if you were like a corporate borrower, there's all sorts of regulations that you have to go through, and you have to get the securities registered, and you have to do all sorts of annual disclosures. But the SEC is prohibited from doing that. But the SEC under Rule 10b-5 is allowed to require you not to say anything that's materially incorrect or omit anything that an investor should know. So it's the one area where the SEC has power. So basically, if you're doing what I was talking about, the official statement and offering document that describes your securities, it describes your credit, you can't say that, you know, your financial statements next year, your revenues are going to increase by 25%. If that isn't in fact the case, you have to have a basis for anything you disclose as a credit matter. And the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, didn't used to go after municipalities. But in the last few years, they've done that more and more, and they've imposed fines on staff members. They prohibited governments from selling securities for, well, all sorts of really nasty things. So anyway, you just want to make sure that you have the right team of people to help you through these things. Then on the next page, I had mentioned Disclosure Council. Disclosure Council can either prepare your official statement or review your official statement. And sometimes there's no Disclosure Council at all. So if I prepare your official statement and an underwriter would like to have their own opinion on it to make sure it's accurate, they would hire what's called Underwriters Council. Next page. This is from 2020, and I don't know how important this is, but it's a graph on who the buyers of the securities are. And the main point of this would be there's quite a few different categories. There's individual investors, there's banks, insurance companies, mutual funds, and you want to tailor your securities usually for a broad base of who the investors are going to be. Unless you're trying to do what's called a private placement with a bank, then you want to tailor it to a bank. Well, which I talk about on the next page, which is the different methods of sale. One is the private placement. A sale to the state of Missouri under like the SRF program is considered a private placement. So as I said before, you don't have an official statement, you don't have a rating, you don't have too much annual disclosure. I think you have to send your audit to them on a yearly basis. The other type of a private placement is a sale to a bank. So the last two transactions I did for the city, banks were, during COVID, banks were really anxious to buy municipal securities. So I would send out an RFP, we'd get proposals in, whichever bank offered the best rate, that's who we would go with. For some reason that's changed. And it has to do with the rising interest rates and inflation, there's whatever's going on in the economy right now, banks are not very interested in buying securities. So even if you wanted to do a private placement, I would probably have you send out a request for proposal that goes to both banks and to underwriters, so you can see what the best situation is. But on the last issue where I was just talking to banks, they were not interested anymore, but that doesn't mean they won't be interested tomorrow. These things change on a daily basis, especially the way the market is right now. The next method of sale, which is a public sale, I talked about it before, but I didn't give much detail. So a public sale is where it's not your sale is not restricted to one buyer. You're selecting an underwriter, and the underwriter in turn sells the securities to investors. And that can be a large number of individuals or banks or whoever they like to sell to. The next page, oops, I missed one. So private placements, which are often bank loans, the beauty of it, and like I said, this has kind of changed, but the beauty of it is that there's lower fees because you don't have a rating. And there's some other fees that go away as well. So the beauty of a private placement is lower fees, but it's offset a lot of times by higher interest rates. Private placements usually carry higher rates than a public sale, even when private placements were much more feasible than they are right now. They often have unfavorable covenants. So they'll have something like it's a 10-year financing, but they can change the rate in 5 years. If they don't like certain things in your financial statements, they can do mandatory redemptions. And you would think that's only under a really extreme conditions, but I've read some covenants that are terrible. Anyway, and the banks usually prefer maturities that are 10 years or shorter, which is often a deterrent to doing a bank private placement. And the last thing is what's called bank qualified. If you do financings in a year that aggregate less than 10 million, there's a special benefit to banks in buying those securities. And that's what's really gone away right now, is that they couldn't care less if your bonds are bank qualified or not. And part of that is, I can't remember when the last tax rules came out, but that was the Trump change in tax rates. Substantially lowered taxes for corporations, and made municipal bonds far less attractive to banks because they like the concept of bank qualified and the tax exemption. So some of the lack of interest by banks right now is forever gone unless the whole tax system is changed. Oh, one thing I would mention about that, if you are going to do like multi-financings, and you can keep your financing under 10 million, even though it's not a great benefit anymore, and some banks don't care, it is worthwhile to try and do bank qualified if you're close to that amount. But if you're debating, oh, should I do 15 million or 10 million to get the bank qualified? Forget it. Just go with the 50, go with what you need. And I guess the other thing is when you're aggregating the 10 million, it isn't just bonds and leases, like we think of big leases. It's also things, little teeny leases, like your copiers. If you're leasing a copier, anything that you finance would aggregate into that 10 million. The next page is for public bond sale. There's two methods of sale, a negotiated sale and a competitive sale. So a negotiated sale is where I'm going to talk about in terms of the way I structure it for the city. A negotiated sale is where I go out and I send out a request for a proposal. You get an underwriter, and then between myself and the underwriter, actually it's me on behalf of the city, I negotiate the terms of the sale with the underwriter. But it's basically either me, or if the city didn't have me, you'd be selecting an underwriter on your own and negotiating the terms of the sale. A competitive sale, this city has not done. Your leases were not conducive to a competitive sale, but if you did a general obligation bond, we would definitely do a competitive sale. So what that is for more clear-cut kinds of financings with favorable interest rates. We set a date and time where bids are received, where just like you would do bidding for any other commodity, and at a designated time, the bids are opened and you select the underwriter who offered the lowest interest rate. So for good credit, easy to understand bonds, a competitive sale is typically the best. But if it's a lease where it's annual appropriation and maybe has a story with it, then a negotiated sale would typically be best. And actually, I forgot that I had this detail of competitive sale on the next page. So I think I already covered that. And the next page, which is negotiated sale, I think I already covered that. I forgot I had all these details in here. The next page is current interest rates. And it's showing the trend from 1972 to present. I did this slide maybe a week or so ago, so it's not absolutely up to date. But the reason I have this slide, I think, is really important. I have a lot of governmental clients who are very concerned about the rise in interest rates. Oh, should we borrow now? Should we wait a year? Will rates be better next year? And so I'd like to show them this slide that even though rates are much higher than they were a year or two ago, the rates are still historically very low. So if you need to borrow, you should go ahead and borrow. And then the last page is thinking about what the market's going to be like. And as I said, on a day-to-day basis, it can change as far as who the buyers are and what kind of a structure works best. But the big questions right now is what is the Fed's going to do as far as interest rate? How is that going to affect the marketplace? But yeah, so inflationary trends and what the Federal Reserve does are the big impact right now. And oh, that's kind of it. The next page is it's just how to find me. But I know Erlene and Sam know how to find me. Any questions? Did I go too fast?
No, that was fed us with a garden hose or a fire hose there. But no, that's a lot of good information.
So in the bottom line is that I am available to hold your hand through the process. And if there's anything take away from tonight that I want to give to you is the whole concept on SRF bonds and getting voter approval. Because if you want to go in that direction, you need to go in that direction as soon as possible. Also for revenue bonds, most of my clients that do revenue bonds and they go to the voters, they authorize, if you think your voters will approve it, they try and authorize a lot more bonds than what they need so that they can issue the bonds in phases and cover a lot of their longer term needs. So I have one client right now that just approved 13 million in revenue bonds. They're doing 5 million right now for a water tower. They don't think they need, there's also a sewer element to their bond authorization. They don't think they need that for like 5 to 10 years from now, but they didn't want to have to keep going back to the voters. So yeah, go do it soon, do as much as you think you need and try not to do it often.
Is there any precedent for combining financing? So let's say we have this big project and part of it, we know we could market, and talk to the public about pretty easily and that they would support. And then maybe part of the project would be a little more difficult to talk to the public about. Is there any reason, or does that even make any sense?
I'm going to try and answer if I understand your question correct. If you're doing general obligation bonds where you go to the voters, every project that isn't completely related has to be on a separate ballot. Okay, so if you were doing parks and fire, they'd have to be separated. If you're doing public safety, though, like police and fire, they can be combined. If you're doing lease financing, you can combine as many things as you want. And if there's different sources of payments, then I set up, you can sell it like as a single $10 million issue, and then I can separate out the purposes and run separate maturity schedules so you can pay for it out of different sources.
But would it make any sense at all? Or has anybody ever? I mean, this is one of those questions where I don't even know if it's legal to do, but to do a general obligation bond for like half of a project and then lease financing for. the
Yes,
other.
you absolutely can do
Okay.
that.
Is that advisable to do that, or does it make things way more complicated?
I'd have to see why you're doing that. Usually if it has to do with like the payment source, so I'm gonna go backwards again. General obligation bonds legally are paid from a property tax,
Mhm.
but they don't have to be. You can choose to pay for a geo bond, half of it with a property tax and half of it with revenues that you have. So that would be a better approach than separating it between between a geo bond and a lease. But you can do them that way. I'm just not sure if it would make sense.
I think I have a question more for Earlene. Currently, do we not have a bond for water and sewer?
We
On
have
the-
one, we have one for both of those two. We have one for sewer and we have one separate for
And
water.
what's the
water is
maturity on
lease
those?
though, isn't
I'm
it?
saying, I believe water is a lease.
Yeah, the sewer is a
Sewer
revenue
is
bond.
Okay, and it matures soon, doesn't it? I mean,
I'm sorry?
as it matures soon, it's
Yes,
also
the
offered.
sewer-
Okay,
the Water one is on there for a fair amount of time still.
okay.
When you have a voter approved obligation bond, you say borrow it now while interest rate is low, can you go through that process and set your interest rate at that given date and time and then not use it or issue any money until
So
10 years later?
yes, basically, a little bit about the process. So the next election is going to be in August. So in August, you wouldn't do anything until after that voter approval. If you got approval in August and you decided to go full force with the issuance, it would take about three months to complete. There is no statute of limitations of any meaningful statute of limitation for issuing bonds. So if you issued like $10 million with the idea you'd split it and do it over time, that's fine. You don't, if you had a change of heart and decided you didn't want to do the project, you could have 10 million authorized that you don't sell one dime of them afterwards. But then if you're going through plans and process and you want to delay it, that's fine. So there's a lot of flexibility in how much you sell and when you sell and how you divide it up.
So you can lock the interest in
Well, only for what you sell.
from the date of.
That's that
Approved.
3 months. So if you
3
approved it in August, 3 months to put it together, you lock in the rate at that time. Anything that you authorized but didn't sell at that time, you're not locking in the rate.
But you would, the city would be obligated payments at that rate though, correct? We didn't have a project moving forward.
Only obligated on that piece that you sold. Like, are you looking at me like I didn't
Can you
explain?
sell without the project being underway? Can you sell bonds? Have the interest rate locked in, but maybe perhaps something is not ready to. Well, you're not ready to get the notice to proceed and say for a year from now. And that time interest rate has gone up, can you still access
You-
that bond at that lower rate of interest?
You cannot, you won't get a locked in rate until the bonds are actually sold, regardless of when they're authorized. And that is why I'll go back to, because of those time constraints, which is getting that bond, there's only, I gotta go back, there's like 4 election dates in Missouri. So, and like I said, there's different, 2/3, 4/7, different voter requirements. So that is a consideration when governments do lease financing. If the lease financing, you could get into the market much quicker than if you did a general obligation bond. Because it doesn't require voter approval.
Payments would have to be made. If even though the project wasn't active and you're paying for construction costs and material costs, you're still having to pay the issuer the principal and interest back.
Whatever type of financing it is, whether it's lease or GO, you don't lock in your interest rate until the day those securities are sold. Did I not answer your question?
Can you sell securities without the project moving forward?
Yes, now that's a whole different kind of a question. If you want to go ahead and start a project and pay for it with cash, you can do that. You have to pass what's called a reimbursement resolution. It's a IRS requirement. So if you started financing something today and then you decide, oh gee, maybe we want to finance it with bonds or a lease, and you waited a month or so, that's fine. If you pass the reimbursement resolution, you can go backwards 60 days. And you can go forward, generally speaking, at least 18 months. There's different rules depending on what it is. It's kind of
What I'm
complicated.
thinking is we've got some
But-
big projects coming up on the right. And these interest rates could creep back up.
But
again.
yeah, what I'm telling you, all that does, what I'm telling you is preserve your ability to finance something that you're doing pay as you go now, to go backwards and finance that with leases or bonds. It doesn't help you as far as the interest rates.
Okay.
You have to have those securities sold to lock in the rates.
Let's try.
Did I explain that well enough,
Yeah.
Sam?
Right. Well, thank you for your time, Joy. We have
Thank
a lot
you.
to, cover. I think, in the past time you've come to us where we found better rates and we refinanced some stuff.
Yes.
I remember
I'm
that.
constantly looking at the
Yeah.
market for opportunities to refinance, and those were the two I did during COVID.
Yeah.
When banks were going crazy to buy securities. Yeah, and you saved quite a bit of money. I didn't bring those savings numbers with me, but yeah, that's a whole nother situation. The feds are saying at their last meeting, which was last week, they were saying that they didn't anticipate that rates would come down at all for at least the next 2 years. Did you hear that? Isn't that fun? So whatever you do, I don't see refundings in the foreseeable
Yeah.
future.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
having
Thank
me. It's
you.
good being out here again. And much to my surprise, the drive was lovely. There weren't a lot of cars on the road. Usually there are, so that was nice.
Should try it in the fall. It's a beautiful drive.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thanks.
All right. Well, Sam, you got anything for us?
I don't have anything else unless you guys have questions.
Let's go home.
Second.
Thank you all for your time.